Committee held a hearing to examine the massive fraud in Minnesota's social services program that resulted in at least $9 billion in taxpayer funds being wasted. Much of this fraud occurred because there were no proper safeguards put in place to prevent fraud before the funds were paid. There was also
Welcome back to Freedom Forge, where we break down the stories the mainstream media is too afraid to touch. If you care about accountability, exposing government waste, and defending your tax dollars, make sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what we've got coming up, because today we're diving into a Senate subcommittee hearing that revealed absolute bombshells about fraud and abuse in our social services programs, starting with an outrageous scandal in Minnesota.
Recognize Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Sessions and Ranking Member Mfume, for always delivering on good quality subcommittee hearings. Last week, the full committee held a hearing to examine the massive fraud in Minnesota's social services program that resulted in at least $9 billion in taxpayer funds being wasted. Much of this fraud occurred because there were no proper safeguards put in place to prevent fraud before the funds were paid. There was also too little oversight on how the money was used once it went out the door to recipients. During the Biden administration, Democrats rushed out federal funds with virtually no safeguards, resulting in massive theft of taxpayer dollars. Republicans repeatedly warned that the absence of guardrails would invite waste, fraud, and abuse. Identifying fraud before money goes out the door is necessary to prevent any further repeat of these failures and to protect taxpayer dollars. We need to get ahead of the criminals, continue to help the Department of Justice in arresting, prosecuting, and jailing those responsible, and ensure federal programs serve those who are truly in need. This committee hopefully is serious about this. I know the majority is on the committee, and we plan on continuing to identify waste, fraud, and abuse and hold people accountable. My first question for Mr. Diefenbach: how could PRAC tools and analysis have been used to stop the large identity and eligibility schemes that defrauded programs in Minnesota?
Thank you, Chair Comer, and again, thank you for your support. The hallmark of most fraud schemes is that people hide information. So leveraging data analytics allows us to see patterns, trends, anomalies, hidden connections, to shine a bright light on what's actually happening. That is the path forward. So we have to assemble the right data, the right team, the right tools, which we already have at the PRAC, thanks to your support. We just need to think more about the jurisdiction of how we're employing those tools, but data is the solution, absolutely.
Okay. Ms. Miskell, given the Treasury is the last stop before payments from federal programs get executed, what authorities would help the department identify and stop high-risk payments for additional agency review?
Thank you, Chair Comer. We are, as I mentioned, implementing a number of payment verification processes. So we're applying the technique of trust but verify, doing some basic checks before agencies can certify a payment. One of the pieces that we are missing is the ability to ping authoritative federal databases to confirm a payee ID, such as a tax identification number or a social security number.
Okay.
So we already received the data, we just can't verify it. So there are a number of databases that would help.
Well, how does Treasury partner with states to prevent fraud in state-administered federal benefits programs? Are there ways that Treasury could increase or enhance their assistance? And I'm sure Minnesota wants no assistance based on what I've determined thus far in our investigation. But how do you partner with states that want to work to prevent fraud?
Thank you, Chair Comer. Do Not Pay, thanks to the Payment Integrity Improvement Act of 2019, authorizes Treasury to provide do not pay services to states that administer federal funds. However, it has been underutilized. We think that it can be part of a multi-layered approach. So things like do not pay before a state issues payments to subrecipients would be very useful. We can also work to address some of their common challenges by adding additional data. Okay. We know this works.
And last question for Mr. Thomas. How can AI and machine learning be used to detect and prevent large-scale fraud schemes? What type of anomalies do these tools flag for investigators to follow up on?
So machine learning, all data science algorithms, inclusive of machine learning and AI, are going to produce indicators of fraud. It's critically important, and each of the programs we've talked about today does this, has a fraud investigator, an analyst who's an expert in the tools, techniques, and technologies that fraudsters use that to look at the data coming out. So the types of things you're looking for are just as what were mentioned earlier, patterns of behavior that don't fit the expected patterns of behavior of someone who's using the money for the intended purpose or for the intended program design. We talk about at GAO, and we publish this, and we support the federal government and the states and local governments in using our fraud risk framework, which is designed to help them develop these indicators for a fraud risk management plan, which would then feed into algorithms, machine learning, AI, other data science methods, all acceptable, that could then be used to track and monitor potential fraud while the program's in execution. That's the purpose of it, is you design the tool to find the behaviors that you want to get rid of.
Very good. Well, we look forward to working with you all as we proceed with this fraud investigation that is starting in Minnesota, and I have a pretty good feeling that it's going to expand to several more states. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
So, let me set the stage for you. This hearing was about massive fraud, at least $250 billion, folks, wasted in Minnesota's social services programs. That's not a typo. $250 billion of your hard-earned money gone. And what was the cause? Just as we've been warning for years, a total lack of safeguards before cash was handed out and almost zero oversight after the money left the building. We're talking about the kind of reckless government spending that makes your blood boil. James Comer, who opened the questioning, laid it out plain and simple. He called out the Biden administration and the Democrats for rushing out federal funds with no guardrails, despite repeated warnings from Republicans about the risk of waste, fraud, and abuse. And now, surprise, surprise, we've got the largest social services fraud in American history. But here's the real kicker. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Comer made it clear, this investigation is starting in Minnesota, but it's going to spread to other states. Mark my words, this is only the beginning. Now, let's talk about how this fraud happened. According to the experts brought in to testify, the government just started handing out money with no real checks in place. No verification of who was actually getting the money. No follow-up on how it was being spent. If you've ever wondered how criminals could steal hundreds of billions from taxpayers, this is how. Bureaucrats asleep at the wheel and politicians more interested in speed than security. Mr. Dienbach, one of the witnesses, explained it perfectly. The hallmark of most fraud schemes is that people hide information. The only way to fight back is with data analytics, real-time tools, and teams that can detect patterns and spot anomalies. But guess what? The government already has a lot of these tools, thanks to Republican support. The problem is they're not using them to their full potential, and nobody's being held accountable for that. Then we heard from Ms. G at the Treasury Department. Get this, the Treasury receives payment data, but they're not even allowed to verify whether the payee's tax IDs or Social Security numbers are real. They have the information right in front of them, but they can't access the databases they need to confirm it. Why? Because Congress hasn't given them the authority. This is what happens when you have layers of bureaucracy and no accountability. The left loves to talk about trust but verify, but the reality is they're just trusting and not verifying at all. Now, you might have heard about the Do Not Pay program. It was authorized back in 2019, supposedly to help states prevent exactly this kind of fraud. But even with that law on the books, states aren't using it like they should. It's been massively underutilized. Why? Because there's no incentive for state bureaucrats to crack down on fraud. The money doesn't come out of their pockets. It comes out of yours. Mr. Thomas from the Government Accountability Office went even further. He talked about using artificial intelligence and machine learning to detect fraud in real time. These are powerful tools that can flag suspicious behavior, spot patterns that don't match how legitimate recipients use the programs, and help investigators zero in on the criminals. But again, what good is the technology if the government refuses to use it or doesn't have the leadership to demand results? Here's my opinion as a proud right-wing patriot. This is exactly what happens when you put big government ahead of common sense. When you have an administration that cares more about handing out money than protecting it. When you ignore the warnings of conservatives in Congress who have been sounding the alarm about fraud, waste, and abuse for years. We all want to help those in need, but that's not what's happening here. What we're seeing is a system that rewards criminals, punishes taxpayers, and leaves the truly needy out in the cold. The Democrats want to sweep this under the rug, but we're not going to let them. The American people have a right to know where their money is going. We need real accountability. We need to empower investigators and agencies to use every tool at their disposal, including data analytics and AI. We need to make sure that programs like Do Not Pay aren't just sitting on the shelf. They need to be mandatory, and there need to be consequences for states and agencies that refuse to use them. Most importantly, we need oversight before, during, and after money goes out the door. The days of spend now, ask questions later, have to be over. This is our money. This is our future. And no one, no bureaucrat, no politician, no criminal has the right to steal it from us. So what's the next step? The investigation is expanding. More states are going to be put under the microscope. The criminals who got rich off this broken system need to be arrested, prosecuted, and thrown in jail. And the politicians and bureaucrats who let this happen need to be held to account by the voters. If you're as fired up about this as I am, then make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Freedom Forge is going to stay on top of this story, and we'll keep fighting for the truth and for your freedom. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay vigilant, stay informed, and never stop demanding accountability from your government.